Namaste, Namaskar, Hari Om, welcome. Welcome to my 7th live stream. I am Maturadas. It is a great honor to have been able to share with new and old friends and from people from all around the world. People are tuning into this live as it's happening and tuning in after the fact, basically, because that's the marvel of technology. And my evening shares, because this is evening in UK, southwest England at the moment. I start off with some 3 ohms, a little prayer to my guru, my teacher, my lineage, and some chants, songs that I've composed with my friend Pranaji, with the group the Bindu Brothers, and then I have my talk. I went on quite a long time yesterday, so bear with me. Even if you don't follow it to the end, you can always come back to it later if you're busy doing some other stuff. And then I normally end off with a song at the end. So there you go. You can see my eyes. I wear glasses because these are tinted and long distance, and I can see what's going on. So here we go. 3 ohms. Please join with me. Omkara. The divine sound vibration, non-different than the absolute truth. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jananjana Salakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Juta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sahagrajatam Sahaguna Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Shri Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavanishwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hai Nimai Sundari. Hare Krishna. It's lovely to be here to share this with you all. Day by day, things change, and all of our stories go on and change and morph according to how we're feeling, what situations we're all in. And we are all in completely different situations, even to my next door neighbors or the man in the flat above me, what to speak of in different countries, different strictures, different climates, who you're living with during this process. You may not be in lockdown, you may be a nurse or a doctor, and all of those wonderful people that are kind of putting their life on the line to help other people during this crisis. This share is giving me an opportunity to be able to share what I can, which is some chants, some songs, and a story which you might find interesting, and which is about the story of East and West, how it all came together, and how this conversation is taking place today with me being the person that I'm called Maturadas. Okay, so please join me in a chant, and I've just got to change the key. Because so many people are facing obstacles and hurdles in their challenges. I thought maybe I should just start with a few little prayers to Ganesh, then go to Shiva, and then go to Krishna and chant some kirtan. And so it's very simple. Ganesh, Sharanam, Sharanam Ganesh. It means I take shelter in you, Ganesh. Ganesh is the elephant-headed god from India, is the son of Shiva. He's not from India, he's from the cosmos and beyond. And every Hindu house has an image of Ganesh over the front door, and is very important in the whole scheme of things. And I have a deep affection for Ganesh, and so I'm going to start, and I have a deep affection for Shiva as well. So, and Krishna. Sorry, just a little tuning. Sorry. So a little bit more. Ganesha Sharanam, Sharanam Ganesha. 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 Ganesha Sharanam Sharanam 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 Om Namah Shivaya Shivaya Namah 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 Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Vasudevaya, 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 Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Jaya Jaya Deva Hari, Jaya Jaya Deva Hari, Jaya Prabhu Dina Dayala Hari, Jaya Prabhu Dina Dayala Hari. Govinda Hari, Gopala Hari, 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 Govinda Hari, Gopala Hari. Jai Jaya Deva Hari, Jai Jaya Deva Hari, Jaya Jaya Deva Hari, Jaya Jaya Deva Hari, Govinda Hari, Gopala 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 Hari. Jai Jaya Deva Hari, Jai Jaya Deva Hari, Jai Prabhu Dina Dayala Hari, Jaya Prabhu Dina Dayala Hari, Jaya Jaya Deva Hari, Jaya Jaya Deva Hari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Jai Deva Hari, Jai Jai Deva Hari, Jaya Jaya Deva Hari, Jaya Jaya Deva Hari. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om. I'm going to be doing a song as well. I needed a sip. Okay. Kind of change my glasses. The next song is a song that I wrote with Pranaji and for the Bindu Babas, and it's about something that I really do believe in, and it's called Only Love, and I could do it. Okay, I did it once. I haven't sung it for a long time, and I like the song. And I like the words. Only love can free your soul, turn bell metal into gold, melt the hearts of young and old. Only love can free your soul. Okay. Got the words here. I do funny noises with my mouth because I don't have a saxophone player or an instrumentalist, so please excuse me. People get ready, jive with the rising tide. Ocean of mercy, deeper on every side. Leaders of Babylon don't know what's going on because the power is shifting, the spirit is lifting, the power is shifting, the spirit is lifting. People get ready, our journey has just begun. What was hidden in darkness is revealed by the rising sun. Ranjit Nath and Lucknow says there's no turning back now because the power is shifting, the spirit is lifting, the power is shifting, the spirit is lifting. So dark these times, so dark this part. Sorry. Where evil takes on human form to rape the world before the dawn. But dawn will come, and with its light, cut down these demons of the night. Thaw their hearts, melt their ice, restore the world to paradise, paradise. Only love can free your soul, turn bell metal into gold, melt the hearts of young and old. Only love can free your soul. Love will get you through the night. Love will make your wrongs and right. If we would let love lead the way, we'll find someday love will stay. Love is in your softest part, sheltered deep within your heart. Love is the means, love is the goal. Only love can free your soul. Only love, everything the eye can see was made with love for you and me. If we can learn to let it flow, love will show which way to go. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. Only love can free your soul, turn bell metal into gold, melt the hearts of young and old. Only love can free your soul. Love will get you through the night. Love will make your wrongs and right. If we let love lead the way, we'll find one day love will stay. Love to you all. May feelings of love emanate from throughout the world, wherever we sit, and send love. Carl Jung once said, a good thought or the right thought can be heard thousands of miles away. So even without the technology, the vibes are there, and all sorts of synchronistic accords or connecting principle, fantastic magic things can go on if we just open our hearts, know that we are all connected together. Okay. Lovely. Some of you may be watching for the first time, and some of you may have been sitting and following my talk that I've been giving. I'm just going to change my glasses again. It's been excuse me, I just need a little sip. Hi, Devaki. So many lovely friends. So fortunate. I mean, it gives plenty of time for everybody to think about things and to delve into things. And one of the things is just feeling extremely grateful. This is what I've been feeling, at least in my this period, more and more grateful for friends, for where I am, my family that I was born into, and the things that I've done in my life um, that were have been kind of quite bizarre. And part of my story that I'm telling is a story about really it's what's in a name. How did I get the name Maturadas? And um, as the people who've been listening to my story I've written an autobiography and it's not published yet, but I spent quite a long time thinking about lots of things and writing. And so I have pondered this big story about what it is that makes us. And so I had to kind of, I realized I'm part of this kind of, I'm between East and West, and it's, many of my friends are, and it's about the two cultures, how they've come together historically, and how specifically spirituality has kind of emanated historically at specific time, at very specific times, and I've been explaining those different times, and basically involving one branch of a specific Indian tradition that had a vision from its a member of it, the kind of, you could say, the modern founder of the Krishna movement, Kedaranath Datta, later called Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in the late Victorian period. And he had a vision that this culture that had come from Bengal, that was very Bengali specific in the eastern part of India, actually had relevance um, uh, for the whole world. In fact, Sri Chaitanya, the original founder of that lineage from 500 years ago, he actually predicted that his name would be heard in every town and village. Not everybody tapped into those types of things to do with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but this specific lineage happens to just be one branch of an ancient lineage that was the one destined to kind of go internationally. And hence me sitting here today with the name Maturadas and giving this talk. And what after him there was his son who became Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and our spiritual master who later A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And I've told the story of his journey and how he came on a boat, how he's come to America, and he's arrived in 1965. And I'm tracing two historical kind of processes. I call them ripple effects because ripples are started normally by a singular object or just a few, and then it sends ripples out, and that's how things. The world is changed by just a couple of, can be changed by individuals over time, or a small little group that starts off quite esoteric and then it expands through this ripple effect over generations and epochs, actually. And this is part of that. Part of the story is the Hare Krishna ripple effect, starting thousands of years ago in India and in the Himalayas. You could say with a great rishi called Vyasadeva. And the modern, kind of more contemporary ripple part is called the psychedelic ripple, which starts with an experiment by Dr. Albert Hoffman in the Sandoz laboratory, where he created LSD. And this is a story that sent out a ripple across the Western world very rapidly, and it affected the whole, especially the 60s and the 70s culture. The music, the art, the aesthetics, the mindset, and the minds of millions of people all over the world, mostly young. Even though the people who were the teachers and leaders of this group, who I've been explaining, the people that kind of manifested and set into motion this whole kind of sociological process, they were a little bit older, much older than my generation, more like my mother's generation. And Bhaktivedanta Swami is of my grandfather's generation, born in 1896. And one of the characters who's very important in the story, Allen Ginsberg, born in 1926, just a few months younger than my mother, born in 1926, just to give an idea of timelines and where we're standing. And then you've got the more direct persons who have influence on my personal life. At the beginning, I only discovered these characters later as I matured and encountered psychedelics and tried to find answers. I discovered where this was all coming from. I had no idea. I was just a young boy growing up in the southwest of London. And it involves great people like the Beatles, basically, and they were the people, and the rock musicians of that time. They were about just one generation, you could say 10 years ahead of me, and they were the immediate influences. And even closer to home was my family, specifically my elder brother Nick, who was 4 years older than me, older than me, and also the environment that we had in our house. This was it's quite important when you look at your lives, and I have lots of discussions with people about how they're brought up, their stories, and it's amazing. Everybody has a different story, and some people have different, similar upbringings, and some drastically different, and it's according to, and both the parents have their stories that bring them together, create you, and the timing when that all happens, because they're also existing within a cultural milieu of their time, and so they carry that whole story with them, and what they want to do. And I suppose my immediate story, is that my parents were very compared. I've shared my autobiography with quite a few people who've read through it, and many people quite go, "Wow, you had a really cool parents," and easy, And I have to. It's only when you look back on life and have more experience do you begin to actually appreciate how wonderful actually my upbringing was. Comparatively speaking, we weren't very rich. We were kind of middle class, southwest England, and my father had been born Jewish, but had rejected the whole package, lock, stock, and barrel. Even though he had certain kind of cultural things from them, but he hated religion and he was an atheist. And my mother was a bit more soft. She was family came from Sheffield, and they'd moved down to London in the 1930s. And my father's father had come from Poland as Jewish immigrants at the end of the Victorian period. But my father was very English, been born in England. And they specifically did not want to bring up my brother and me with all the trips and stuff that they had to endure through their parents and their generations. And they were quite modern and specific about the way they wanted to bring us up and the amount of freedom that they allowed us to have to be ourselves, and were quite supportive. Very supportive, actually, with letting us allow us to basically do what we want. And as I turned, one of the biggest things that really kick-started my kind of life, really, there was things going on, and the school, and you had your neighbours, and where we lived in southwest London was a suburb, a very nice suburb, right next to beautiful parks and Bushy Park, and the Thames is not far away, and we had an open-air swimming pool nearby. And the social life was young parents bringing up from the post-war period, bringing up their children. And my brother, being 4 years old, he went to the local school. There was an infant school we both went to, Stanley Road. Then we went to Windmill Road, and I was just following behind what my brother did, really. And he had his circles of friends. We were both very social in our groups, our age groups, and nearly all the parents of our friends all knew each other. It was a bit like a family, actually. I taught my mother. It was quite, when we were very young. The parents used to take charge in kind of babysitting and stuff like that. So it was just to give you a little bit of a background. And we were listening to pop music, and music was okay. Our parents and family, my parents used to listen to more jazz, Frank Sinatra, and I can remember songs like My Honeysuckle Rose and Jack the Knife, and a little bit of Louis Armstrong and a bit of classical, but we didn't have much of that going on. We had my mother's sister was an artist, and we had a kind of art gene thing going on in our family. And I got a lovely present from my aunt when I was about 6 of crayons, and being very interested. My brother was always drawing and doodling, and my father was a draftsman, an engineer. At that early time, my mother was playing the role of a housewife, and later would take up the role as a school secretary. She was trained to be a secretary, and so that was what was going on. But what we were interested in as kids was music, but it really, for me, in terms of my memory and the impact of major things in my life, it was Nick. I got most of my information about what was going on through my brother, and he'd mentioned, and he was aware that the Beatles were going to be playing on the Royal Variety performance, and it was just near my 7th birthday in 1963 in November. And a couple of guests, neighbours came, because not everybody had the televisions, and the Beatles came on, and it was like, for me, that is a defining moment, and I think for millions in England, similar to when the Beatles a few months later would appear in America on the Ed Sullivan show. I think in England, they estimated that there was 20 million people watching the television that evening, and a few months later in America, it was going to be 73 million watching. So for young people specifically of that time, this event was far more important to me than politics and John F. Kennedy and getting assassinated. Didn't really make much of a dent in me, but the arrival of the Beatles was phenomenal, because the next day at infant school, that's all we talked about. Everyone overnight became obsessed. And my brother had Fab magazine, this magazine that was all stuff about lots of pictures. And we shared a bedroom for a while. And then we had 2 bedrooms, but his room was just covered with all of these pictures. And it was the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And then it became the Kinks. And then the Pretty Things and the Yardbirds. And then you had all the other groups, Brian Poole and the Tremolos, Freddie and the Dreamers, but that was more kind of happy-go-lucky pop. The Beatles were really at the top of it all, and so they were going to be very influential about what in my journey and our whole generation. And I've already explained on the last part of my story that basically I think it was Paul McCartney had just turned 25. And Sergeant Pepper's had come out in the June of 67. He'd been interviewed by Life magazine and admitted to taking LSD. And that's the first time I'd ever actually heard about it. And for many, many people, because it had been kept hush-hush while they'd been doing the Revolver album. Which didn't have much influence on me, because for some reason Nick didn't have that album, and because he didn't have it, I didn't get to listen to it. But we got, the day it came out, Sgt. Pepper's, my brother got it, I think the day it was released, 1st of June 67, and we literally had it on almost continuously, and everything about it, as endless documentaries, not just the recording and the sound, but the visually, the cover, what it looked like, the fact you could read the words, and there were these pull-out things, and the whole thing was totally absorbing. And this, for us, was as good as Holy Writ, and because we were a non-religious family, we didn't go to church, we didn't speak the word God. The only time that God happened to occur was as I got a little older. I went to the Boy Scouts, and we had a church parade once a month. And my mum told me later, and I didn't really know at the time, but my father, who's extremely left-wing and atheistic, was quite concerned, because he considered that the Boy Cubs could be a kind of neo-Nazi, fascist, kind of indoctrinal group, and going to church wasn't really on his thing. But anyway, that's what we did. We didn't take it very seriously. It all meant nothing to me at all. I just couldn't take religion. The whole idea of God was just not on the horizon in my reality or our household, to tell you the truth. And it was pop for us as young music. The main obsession was pop music. And as I got older, I just around that time when the Beatles appeared, we had our first sports competitions at infant school, and on the first ever, I just won by a huge margin in sprinting, and I suddenly became an athlete. I had never been tested my athletic prowess until that time, and that was it. Suddenly, I was I'm a sports person, and I discovered that. And my mother had been very good at swimming as well. So we had a local swimming pool. We had one in Isleworth. We had an indoor one there, and we had an outdoor in Hampton and in Teddington nearby. And our mother took us swimming, and I learned very, very early on how to swim, and I was good. My mother's side of the family have quite physical, and my mother was quite tall and big, and she was very good. And when we were young, once on holiday, she even saved somebody who was drowning. She was good at swimming, so I had this physical thing going on, and listening to music, but not at this time playing guitar, and this hadn't quite come yet. And before this Summer of Love, as I was growing up from, this is like 90, when they appeared, it's like 90, quite crucial all these years when you're growing up, 64, 65, 66, you change, the world changes. And we used to watch this pop fab new world that was created, the youth culture and all the rock groups and the music, not rock groups, pop groups that were appearing on Top of the Pops once a week, and then Ready Steady Go on ITV. This is what we were obsessed about, and listening to the hit parades, Alan Freeman, and doing the countdown at the end of the week. We used to kind of obsess about music, and this is what we used to talk about a lot with our friends. And so all of this scene, and the people that were part of this already, people that we looked up to, these were the people that were going to influence me as I grew up into the kind of ideas I was going to develop, and specifically the things I came into contact with via my brother. Okay, so I got to the Summer of Love, 1967, in my talk yesterday, and things kind of carried on. But in terms of the big picture of what was going on in the world, I was not that aware, but we were watching on the newspaper things like in '68, as everyone knows, things got a bit sour in terms of the innocence and of the power and aesthetic approach to changing the world that was there in '67 kind of got a bit more confrontational. There was big things in Chicago in America. There's a famous event that happened. They're called the Chicago Riots, where the police and kind of came out, and it's awful. It gave a terrible impression to the whole of America that the government was trying to suppress kind of peaceful students who were just protesting against the Vietnam War. And a lot of people got hurt. It was quite violent. And 8 people were arrested in connection with that. It's called the Chicago 8, including 2 very famous people, Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin, who were part of the Yippies, who were political activists who had taken psychedelics, like most of the generation that was protesting, smoking marijuana and taking LSD. You can actually find, it was dramatized. I saw a fantastic drama version of this everything. You've got all the minutes from the court, and you could see the generational clash between the old rednecks of the establishment and these leaders and these very, very articulate people who wanted to protest against the ways of the government and the drafting of innocent young Americans off to a senseless war. And one of the most amusing parts of that court thing is when they bring Allen Ginsberg, who's a notable person in society. Even though being a bohemian, he'd written books, he was notable, he was a public figure, he hadn't been arrested, and he chanted Om in court, which was quite wonderful. It was funny watching the actor do that in when it was reenacted. Anyway, there's many things that happened about that, and just to give you an idea about how paranoid the government was about students and stuff, and the fact that there could be an imminent kind of like revolution in America. In the book Acid Dreams, LSD, the CIA, and the '60s Rebellion, they did a lot of research. They discovered that Abby Hoffman's kind of got bodyguard, and that was actually an undercover CIA agent, and quite a big percentage, or at least 100 or more, of the so-called hippies of the Chicago 8 protests were actually undercover agents, and they were the people that were instigating violence to create an excuse for the response from the violence from the police. So that's the kind of level, the paranoia that the government had of young hippies, that they weren't, they were freaking out because it was growing. It was a movement that was growing bigger and bigger and bigger all over the world as time went on. America had its own kind of things that were going on, and in Europe, you got Street Fighting Man by Mick Jagger, and all of those songs from that time. There was riots in Paris, there was riots in England, with the police clashes about various issues, generally against the war, and things like that, and it was causing a confrontation. And as I mentioned, also they were trying to kind of pin the rock groups, so they started to bust the Rolling Stones for marijuana, and then George Harrison. And there was a famous piece written by the editor of the Sunday Times. He seems to have been a bit more kind of wiser than his stupid son. He was Cerise Mogg, and he wrote a very famous essay about how ridiculous it was, all this persecution of rock stars over something inconsequential like marijuana. And there was also a report done by Baroness Wootten at that time about hashish and the marijuana. And she, in the report at that time, said there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's actually not bad for you. And did they listen to that? No. They just carried on with their kind of like mindset and their draconian things, and created all these ridiculous laws about marijuana and hash as a way of persecuting hippies and intimidating them because they were anti-establishment. And LSD was part of that. And LSD was gone up into Class A. I mean, there's been people in America in jail for like 20, 30 years for a couple of hits of acid in certain states. Absolutely terrible. And meanwhile, in the Vietnam War, what's happening is the CIA are bringing in kilos and kilos of heroin in body bags themselves subversively, and selling it on the black market. If you want to see the background behind that, watch American Gangster with Russell Crowe and Denzel Washington. That's the theme of that film. And all this stuff is known. You just have to do a little bit of research. So this whole war on drugs was just a big front against the establishment to persecute minorities. And behind the scenes, the CIA and people were doing all their nefarious activities to exploit the situation and make some money for their clandestine activities. Okay. One thing that I didn't complete the story of about the Summer of Love is, how was it that after Oswald Owsley, the first person to really make good acid, after you couldn't get the acid from Sandoz laboratories anymore, after it became illegal in the mid-66, how did it carry on? And how did LSD, how did all this volume of people that were becoming part of this thing, how did it get to everybody? Okay. Now, this is an interesting part of the story, and it's not a secret. There's lots of documentaries and books on the subject. There's a really good, if you go on Netflix, it's still on there. It's called The Sunshine Makers. It's a really well-made documentary, and there's another documentary called Orange Sunshine, and which is a good documentary, but I prefer the style of the documentary for the Sunshine Makers. So what happened was, there were these two characters, Nick Sands and Tim Scully. They were both kind of geniuses and knew about chemistry and all of that stuff, and had dropped LSD and loved it. Now, what happened to many people after they've had LSD and profound LSD trips, where they connected with some kind of divine energy, they had a calling. They suddenly felt called that it was their mission to try and get this substance to as many people as possible. Because if that had that effect on them, just think of all the people. If everybody took this, there would be no wars. People would see the connectivity of life. People would see the spiritual nature behind things. This is the kind of amazing things that people do kind of get a glimpse of on high doses of LSD in the correct setting, a profound positive trip, not discounting all the other things that can happen. This is the fuel that was actually fueling the hippie movement behind the scenes. Um, there was where did the hash come from? Where did the LSD come from? And I found that part of an interesting part of the story, because I kind of got involved in a bit in that, and not so much in the psychedelic bit, but the other bit in my life, in different times in my life. So I found it fascinating, and so they actually set up these illegal laboratories undercover, and they made this fantastic acid that had this brand name, Orange Sunshine. Now, Oswald Owsley himself realized that when you're due to the very nature of these substances and what they can do, it's very important that the person who is creating them has the correct mindset, because the vibe and the intention, all these subtle energies that you become aware of on psychedelics, are actually going to go into the production of what you're creating, which is a kind of alchemy. And the mindset of an ancient alchemist. It's all to do with your consciousness and the involvement with elements and getting involved with them. So Oswald Owsley was of that ilk, and he's kind of had, his student was Tim Scully. Tim Scully learned from him. Nick Sands had been, I think, doing some stuff himself. Somehow or other, I won't go into all the details, they were brought together as a kind of team, very, very different type of personalities completely, but both fascinating. And if you see in the documentary, you can see their personalities. They tell everything, and they're friends, and you get a good idea. Now, they were the people that were the creators of this thing, and there's a long story how they managed to do that, and how they managed to not get detected for at least about 4 years. Okay, there's all sorts of conspiracy theories about infiltration into underground movements, and that's part of the story as well. But while they were making there was a group in California, I think something, can't remember the exact place, but they had their kind of gang, and their leader was called Griggs, and they got some LSD from a Hollywood producer, and they all had these amazing trips, and they were kind of delinquent types in a sense, but they were rebels, social rebels, really rebels with a cause, became with a cause, and they heard about Timothy Leary, and they had a kind of a discussion with him. It's a long story, and because this is where the psychedelic story goes into you could say, the shadow part of the story, because the shadow is that which is hidden. It's kind of not in the light and revealed. The stuff I've been explaining is mostly what's been going on over the top and what people are going on in society, but for these things to happen, there has to be something going underground, really underground, and because it had been made illegal and made as a Class A, these kind of escapades and adventures were extremely dangerous for everybody involved, involving quite large prison sentences if they got caught. But there was a big ideological push. Whether you think it's good or bad is not to the point. The point is actually, how did this go on? And it's very important, because me, as a teenager, in the summer of 72, I think, yes, managed to get, it took a while, but I managed to have Orange Sunshine LSD, and it was one of the most incredible varieties of LSD that I ever had, maybe to this day. Okay, so this Eternal Brotherhood of Love, to get the money, it was a group. It involved kind of Timothy Leary being their kind of guru, the ideological guru, and there was some connection with also Bill Hitchcock, who was part of the Memon family. He eventually, when loads of them got busted years later, Bill Hitchcock turned state's evidence and gave quite a lot of information away, as did Timothy Leary himself when he got busted many years later. And that's a little bit of a kink in his story. How much he said and what he did is another story. But they were facing incredibly long prison sentences. And Timothy Leary being dubbed the most dangerous man in America didn't really help. And so this is going on. This is the kind of clandestine part of it all going on under the scenes, and there's a kind. There is this. This is kind of a part of the mindset of lot of the underground and the hippie generation was that as soon as you had your first joint from however you got your stuff was, you wanted it again. And then the person you got it from had to get it from someone, and someone had to get it from somewhere else. And these kinds of, unless you kind of were involved in that process, you didn't really know what was going on. But, you know, if you were in America, it generally involved a lot of marijuana coming from Mexico and South America and coming up. Read Weed by Jerry Camstra. That's a very, very good book. And also books on the Eternal Brotherhood of Love to get the ergotine concentrate and different substances which were very difficult to get hold of to make the illegal LSD. They needed funds, and that involved smuggling marijuana from Mexico into India. So this chain thing started up, an underground world of bringing psychedelics, really, from marijuana from South America. And then that developed later with the Brotherhood. They got connections in Afghanistan and started to make hash oil. And what's also interesting, that gets a little bit in the story later, is that they were based, the Brotherhood, in Laguna Beach in California, south of LA. And there was a shop there called the Mystic Arts Shop that was a kind of, there were a lot of them were involved in that shop. And there's a famous picture of a Hare Krishna chap sitting on a devotee sitting outside the shop. And this is kind of what actually happened. A lot of the Brotherhood started small, but as it got bigger and bigger, there was a central core members, but there was lots and lots of people connected with it. We had on Facebook a few months ago a discussion about, from that picture with many old Krishna devotees, one who was actually the president in charge of that temple during some of those heady times, and some other person who's quite a big shot in ISKCON. When he was a hippie, he used to come down from wherever he was and buy quite a big quantity of hash oil from the Brotherhood. And they called themselves the Brotherhood of Love. They weren't called that at the beginning, but after having acid, they wanted to come out with a brilliant name, and I love it. I think it's fantastic. The Brotherhood of Eternal Love. Timothy Leary had called his whole thing Castalia, and the League for Spiritual Discovery, which a term that he got from Hermann Hesse from his book Journey to the East. And people were tapping into all sorts of kind of interesting things at this time to describe their people were coalescing into groups. This whole thing I was mentioning before, it started in the 60s with poetry readings, and then small little kind of acid tests. And then in England, you had smaller events happening with a few people just coming over a couple of days, and groups like Pink Floyd doing the Roundhouse and the UFO. And then what started happening is, as this LSD was being made and distributed through the world through underground networks, it was, people where I was especially London being a centre, and then it would be distributed. It was going to students and everywhere. This is how you could get these things. It was somehow making its way into the inroads into students and people who kind of were either just serendipitous, they just kind of meet someone and someone say, "Hey man, do you want some acid?" Or a conversation, "Where can I get some acid?" It wouldn't take long to be able to find a source in those days, because behind the scenes there were people on a mission to make sure that this is exactly what would happen, that this drug would get out there. One of the unusual characters in the whole story that appears in Acid Dreams is a guy whose one identity name was Ronald Stark. And some people believe that he was the CIA infiltrator into the Brotherhood of Love. Apparently he appeared on the scene in 1970. And funnily enough, when I was at the Kumbh Mela gathering in India in 89, I met a very interesting chap called Brother John, who in his day had actually, I mentioned Ronald Stark. He said, "Ronald? My goodness." And he said, "Yes, he said," and it's mentioned in the book that they set up an acid laboratory in Leeuwarden University in Belgium somehow or other. And this brother John happened to has been connected with Ronald Stark during that time. So things were happening as well, because they did get eventually the Brotherhood's laboratory did get busted. And they kind of Nick Sands ran away and disappeared for quite a while, but he did get busted. It's amazing, his story. Even when he was in jail, he got it smuggled into him, and he was giving trips to people. Very charismatic and very much on a mission. And funnily enough, I met one of his ex-wives anyway, who'd been a member of Osho. I think he was a member of Rajneesh's group later. Lived in Pune, and we met. She was called Doshi, and we met in Rishikesh on her 60th birthday in around 99 or something like that. I can't remember when it was, but it was interesting. I started to meet people connected with this story many years after the time when it all happened. Meanwhile, I'm still growing up. In the Summer of Love, I'm just 11 years old, totally into all the music. And as it turns into 1968, in terms of all these political things and turning on, there was the music. And for me, the most incredible album that after Sgt. Pepper's was Axis Boulder's Love by Jimi Hendrix. And I was listening to this in the summer of 68 as a young kid, before having to go to grammar school. This was a big thing for me because we'd been in primary school, and I'd passed this thing that they had in England at that time called the 11 plus, and we had different categories of schools, grammar schools and secondary moderns, and I managed to get to the grammar school that my brother had gone to, Hampton Grammar, and our house that we'd moved to in 66 happened to be right opposite the school, the playing fields on this street called Hanworth Road. It was a lovely we'd moved from a 1950s house to a 1890s late Victorian house, quite rambling compared to where we'd been, with a lovely big garden. And we both had big bedrooms, me and my brother. And I immediately painted my walls a kind of poster box red, and another one a kind of deep midnight blue, which I thought was really cool. And my brother developed his bedroom. My brother was a very kind of dedicated follower of fashion, and he had very 60s things like old cigarette advertisements from metal ones from the 30s and 40s, and he had a tailor's dummy with a cape and a gown and a mortarboard and all sorts of paraphernalia. It was quite funky, and he had a good sound system. I had a very mediocre kind of stereo in my room, and I started to put posters on my wall. I've still got one here. Maybe tomorrow I'll show it to you. It was done by Martin Sharp, who was the artist for Oz magazine, which was one of the more interesting than International Times, being a young person. International Time was a kind of more in the form of a newspaper, and it was a bit less interesting to look at. And I would be brought up in Batman comics and things, and I liked the comic format. Plus, my brother had all these fantastic comics by R.C. Crumb with cartoons of Mr. Natural and the other artists who did the Furry Freak Brothers. And I was reading all of these things as I was kind of going from 11 into 12. If you see the picture of me on my timeline of my here on Facebook, you can see a little picture of me. I'm only kind of 12. That's around 69, and while that's all going on in England, there's these this coming together that I was just a bit too young. But I remember in when was it? The Stones in the Park was it was in June, basically. Was it? Right. Or was it July 69? Anyway, in Hyde Park, they started to have these series of free events in concerts where more and more people could come together. And I went up, and in 69 was just after Brian Jones had died. There was a whole big concert that the Stones headlined. There were other groups there, and you can see it on television. It's called The Stones in the Park. And I couldn't go. I was just too young that year, and my brother went up there, but got to hear all the story about the atmosphere, and you saw it on telly in the evening. It was just mind-boggling. They estimate, nearly up to nearly 500,000 people were in Hyde Park for that concert. It was getting really, really big. And what happened also then in America in August '69 was this massive event. If you see the leap just in 2 years from the Summer of Love of Monterey Pop in '67 to Woodstock, which was going to happen in '69, it's phenomenal. Just in sense of the volume of the amount of young people involved in this whole kind of hippie movement at various levels. I mean, you just have to watch the Woodstock because it's just mind-boggling. And also the wonderful thing about that festival, because it was advertised as 3 days of peace and love, was that there was hardly any negative things happened amongst everybody. Everybody was there and sharing, and basically people were high, and they were high on marijuana, and they were high on acid, and there were things like the hog farm communes, people like Wavy Gravy, far out kind of social activist hippies from the California Bay Area, and people. It was this whole thing, giving out free food to all the people and sharing. And this had grown, and almost within days of that happening in America, we had the English version of the Isle of Wight, the first Isle of Wight festival. Now, the funny thing about that for me is that I happened to be on holiday with my parents on the Isle of Wight. We didn't plan it at the same time that was going on. And my older brother Nick had an accident on his motorbike and was a bit inactive because he had a plaster cast on, and but we were all there together as a family. And as we were going around the island, going from one little holiday place to another, you could hear on the radio what was happening on the site. We didn't go anywhere near it, but it was quite already. There was a clash between the kind of free, kind of more anarchistic type hippies, and the Isle of Wight started off as a money-making thing, to make money, to pay the artists, and they charged money. Woodstock started off like that, but then they had to give up because the volume of people, otherwise they just had to allow it to become free in the end. And what happened in Isle of Wight is that there were people ripping down the fences, ripping them down and everything. There's a great scene, I think, with Joni Mitchell coming on stage and calming all the crowd. I can't remember if that's 1970 or '69 because there was two Isle of Wight festivals. The big thing about the headliner that was making the big thing of that one was Bob Dylan. And not only that, there was behind the scenes, basically what had happened was, okay, I'm going to have to enlarge now at this time, coming into this time, because we're coming to '69, was at the beginning of that year, 3 males with their partners, Krishna devotees, had left from California to England. And there's an amazing story. There's in various books by the people that were involved with that, which was Shamasunda, who'd become Sam, who'd become Shamasunda, Roger, who'd become Gurudas, and Mukunda. And Gurudas was married to Jamuna, and Mukunda was married to Janaki, and Shamasunda was married to Malati, and they had a daughter. And they came to England. And Shamasunda specifically had this focused idea of meeting the Beatles. And they went through, there's some amazing stories about what they went through. But ultimately, the day that actually the real actual connection got made was a whole bunch of the guys from San Francisco had decided to come over to London. And included Ken Kesey, Mickey Hart from the Grateful Dead, a few other people, and some Hells Angels. And I think they had brought their Harley Davidsons on the plane or something. I can't really quite remember all the details, but their thing was they were planning to go to the place that the Beatles had set up in London called Apple. it was this building with this big psychedelic painting on the side done by these Dutch people called The Fool. It was fantastic. And there was a shop downstairs, and there was an office upstairs. And see, this, Beatles hadn't been touring for a while, and they recorded I think they recorded the White Album already. Yeah, they hadn't. They recorded Sgt. Pepper's, recorded the White Album, and Mickey. Okay, some of the people that came from Los Angeles, they didn't know where to stay, and so they had just got this very simple place in Covent Garden without hardly any facilities. Very austere. Krishna devotees live very austerely compared to most people. They were quite prepared to kind of sleep on the floor in sleeping bags, and they used to kind of follow their daily routine of pujas and offering of food and chanting their japa. They had been involved in this process of training since meeting Bhaktivedanta Swami in 1967. They'd gone through a process, but it was only 2 years at that time. And these people from San Francisco came to stay with the devotees, and they were planning to, and some of them didn't. I think Mickey Hart stayed in a hotel. It was just too much for them. And I think some Hells Angels, they just didn't want to take their shoes off. And they ended up going all together, and kind of Shama said, "Can I join you?" And they all went together to Apple, and they were all in this big room, and it was apparently quite a chaotic scene. And apparently in a side room to the side, George was there with, I think, John and maybe Ringo. I'm not sure if Paul was there at that time. They were having a kind of meeting while this kind of gathering of people, eccentric people from San Francisco, was there, all kind of waiting to connect with the Beatles. Now, as I told before, George Harrison had been listening to this album, this recording that Bhaktivedanta Swami had made, called Krishna Consciousness, on the Happening album in 1966, and he'd been listening to the Mahamantra and chanting it. And he was reading Autobiography of a Yogi and getting a very, he'd done the whole Maharishi meditation thing. So, and he was learning sitar from Ravi Shankar, deeply absorbed in the whole Indian culture, but never met a Krishna devotee at this time. And apparently the story goes that there was a point where George Harrison just kind of opened the door to see what was going on and who was there. And he immediately kind of saw Shamasundar, this person with the shaved head, looking very different in the corner. He just kind of went right through everybody and went straight to Shamasundar and said, "Hi, I've been waiting to see you guys." There's a famous line that he says, and that's where the connection made, and that became a lifelong connection. And when I say lifelong, I mean to say Shamasundar became so close, and Mukunda and Guru Das as well, but Shamasundar specifically, that at the time when George Harrison was passing away years later, they would be called by George to be at his bedside to be chanting Hare Krishna. So this is very a monumental kind of historical moment, and there's a whole story about then George getting to meet the devotees and what they went through. They also ended up staying famously a bit later after that in sharing a building with that it had International Times. And me and Darren and some of our friends, we have a lovely friend called Lee Harris, who is in his, I think he's 80s now, and he, lovely gentleman, had the shop on Portobello Road, I think called Alchemy, one of the first head shops, and he was part of the whole International Times and remembers it fondly with the Krishna devotees moving in there. They were part of the scene at the time. Basically, International Times, then Oz was going to come later, and the Hare Krishnas are appearing straight out of San Francisco, and then George Harrison befriended them. Again, there's lots of beautiful photographs. And then when you hear the interviews with George, with his friend Mukunda, in a book called Chant and Be Happy, and other interviews where, because George had a sense of humor and he got connected with Monty Pythons, and he was, after dropping acid, and similarly like Shamasundar, there was this aspect to spirituality and divinity, and a kind of trickster type of kind of mentality, a kind of how to the cosmic joke element of things, and how that God isn't just some kind of stern person. He's a very playful person, has a sense of humor, and likes mysterious ways of doing things, not always above board, actually. And so George Harrison was thinking, I wonder what would happen if you go to. I'm not going to do a Liverpool accent. I won't try. Wonder what would happen if you put this mantra, the Maha Mantra, on a pop record, and you're a Beatle and you release it. What will happen? He was quite prepared to see the magic that would happen, and it's quite phenomenal what happened, because he just recorded that single and brought it with him, and John Lennon, I think Ringo, and they all went off to Isle of Wight for the Isle of Wight festival to meet Bob Dylan, and he got that music to be played on the stage. And this is what happened. I was driving around at the Isle of Wight with my brother and my family, and suddenly, the local radio who were following it, they played the song that had just been recorded in Apple Studios, and we're all listening to it, going, right, how it goes, Hare Krishna, where's it going there? And it just went, Hare Krishna, and it was like, right, that was interesting. And I remember asking my Nick, I said, what is this? And she says, oh, I've heard somewhere, yeah, it's something that the Beatles are into now at the moment, George is into that. That was it. And it was like, okay, well, the Beatles must be kind of quite cool. Didn't quite get it, but that's where I first heard Hare Krishna, and it went into the hit parade, and we saw them on Top of the Pops. So they were kind of legitimized, and it got popular all over Europe. It got into the number one for, I think, in Yugoslavia for weeks and weeks and weeks. And a small little, the Devotees, they started to recruit Devotees from England at that time. The first who I became very good friends with, and it was influential in my destiny and many others, was a lovely person who's unfortunately passed away. His name was Kula Shaker, and he was very young. He was only 18, and he'd been working with light shows and things at these clubs, where the Floyd and stuff had been. He was very young and very in the scene. And he got to meet the Devotees, and kind of almost, you can see the pictures of him. He had his hair, and then he didn't have his hair within weeks, but he was there for that recording. And there was other Devotees like Yogeshwara, who had been in Paris. He speak French. He'd come over, and there was a bunch of some people had come from America, and I think Dhananjaya was about to join. I don't think he quite joined at this time, or maybe he had. There was some of the first Devotees to join in England, the Hare Krishna movement. So it was expanding, and it was around. I'm not sure what the date was, but they eventually they had a kind of a festival in England that Shama Sundar, he had. Was very, very talented at woodwork and carpentry. And in San Francisco, before being a Krishna devotee, and even as, when he joined it, he needed money as a married man. He'd been working in setting up shops and shop fronts and carpentry and cupboards and shelves and stuff. He's very talented. And he also built the very first Rath Yatra cart and built the first Jagannath deities that were in San Francisco. Jagannath is a deity form from an ancient temple in Orissa, very popular in the eastern part of India, and Prabhupada had worshipped Jagannath as a child in India. People even have these little carts as children and things in Bengal, and they replicate this great festival that happens in Puri. And Prabhupada's great dream was to bring this ceremony to the world, to introduce this incredible form of worship of God. And Shama Sundar was right on that very, very first one, and they developed their techniques and their styles, and then he came to England and introduced it into London. And then they got the property in Bury Place, which was this quite near in Bloomsbury, really quite kind of. There were some other kind of trendy kind of Steiner bookshops and books from India and things like that happening there. It was quite a trendy place to be, and that's where the Krishna movement started to get established. Okay, now meanwhile, me back in southwest London, where I am growing up, and at Hampton Grammar School, hating practically every minute of it, but being very good at sports, not only athletics. I was good at football. I got headhunted and scouted, and I played for the Richmond Borough football team for my age. And I also I left the Cubs. I belonged to a private swimming club in Feltham. I was very good at breaststroke. So I swam for that club and I swam for Hampton. And this kind of English schools and a lot of schools, they like kids into sports. And if you can be kind of reasonable at sports, they kind of overlook your bad exam results and your reports about school, because as the years went on I don't know, they had this grade system in England. You had a infant school up to 8, and then 8 to 11, which is primary school, and then you went to secondary school after your 11 plus on the way up. And went through my first year, and I met some really good friends of mine. And this close friends of mine that I met there, I went on this journey. We all went on it together, basically. But it started in terms of I had been, even though I was into sports, my family, unfortunately, you could say, were heavily into smoking. My grandfather, who was 60 years older than me, smoked a pipe and he smoked fags. And my mum, when I was a child, she got into smoking little mini cigars and these little cigarellos that were like cigarettes with tips, but and I was obsessed. I was mostly born addicted and around tobacco. And when I started smoking was at the age of 9. And when I was doing my paper round at the age of 10 and 11, I was smoking 10 fags a day. And my brother, 4 years older, wasn't even smoking. I actually started smoking before him. And my kind of parents knew, but because my mum was smoking, they couldn't really lay a trick on me. And then it became apparent on my kind of 13th birthday that what was the point of me hiding it behind their back? And they allowed me to smoke in front of them, which many people find really shocking. And the fact they can't, I know adults who can't even smoke in front of their parents. And I've been in India in my family with friends who are in their 60s, and the elder cousin who's 70 is coming up, and they all see him and they all put out their fags, because there's a whole thing about not smoking in front of elders. But we didn't have that in our family, and my aunt smoked, and I collect cigarette packets. So I was quite into the whole smoky thing. It was part of my thing. And my brother got into it later. My brother left school and went to art college, and it was great for him because he didn't have to worry about them telling you to get your hair cut and all of that kind of stuff. And there's some great pictures of my brother. I think in that first year at college, he went to Isleworth Polytechnics. He's on his motorbike. All his mates had motorbikes. Easy Rider had come out. It was really cool to have a motorbike. And he had long hair and a beard. And he could even shave and grow a beard from the age of 30, and he had a deep voice. And he was my elder brother, Nick. And he had his gang of friends. He had a friend called Dominic Miles, whose cousin was Simon Kerr, the drummer from the rock group Free. And all of their mates used to hang out, go there really. And sometimes at our house, but in the evenings they used to go to Dominic Miles's house because his parents' mother was very, very liberal, and they all used to hang out there. And I think that's where my brother had his first experiences of LSD, and that's where they all used to smoke pot, and everybody at student college was. And it literally just took me a little while, where my brother had come back from college one evening, and I think it was in the winter of '69. It was the winter, yeah. And I was nearly I was getting to 14 and 13, and my brother just came in one day. Our parents had gone out shopping to do the Friday night shopping at the local Sainsbury's in Feltham. And we sat down and he got his roll ups and he said, "Would you like to try some pot?" And I said, "Yeah. Okay, what is it?" It's not going to make me addicted, is it? He said, "No, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that. It's really okay." And he showed me what he did, and he got these cigarette papers in those days. He used to stick 3 together. And he put his Golden Virginia tobacco, lit this little bit of dark stuff, and he says it's from Kabul. I've never really heard of Kabul, but that was in Afghanistan. He just called it Kabul. And he rolled this joint, and we sat there. Parents were off, and we sat and smoked this joint. And it tasted good, not that strong. I think he was being very cautious and put very little in. And to tell you the truth, it was a bit of an anticlimax, and I didn't really feel anything. But A few weeks later, me and my friend Chris Jackson, we decided to kind of resolve this dilemma. And in Richmond, because this is how do things happen? How did you get hold of, people from other cultures said, young children, how did you manage this? Where did you get hold of this? How did this happen? But this is what happened. This is what the scene was. And I was, and Chris Jackson, we were most probably the youngest little hippies in the whole area. There was maybe a couple like us, but not that many. There was a few. And we had the look. So Chris Jackson had his look. I had my kind of look, had my tie-dye T-shirt, had my neck chief, had my hipster trousers. And in Richmond, right next to the Odeon, you came over Richmond Bridge, very famous bridge, over into Richmond from St. Margaret's. There was the Odeon, and on the corner there, in those days, there was this very famous cafe that had been famous with beets, and it was called L'Auberge. Uh, what had happened also in the 50s in Soho and places, that kind of Italian espresso coffee bars had been the place where young people gathered. And this guy at that time was an Italian guy called Andy, and he ran the L'Auberge. And our dentist used to be just opposite on the corner. And I remember one day as I was waiting for the dentist, somebody was looking out the window and they said, look, there's Mick Jagger going into L'Auberge. It was one of those types of places because Mick Jagger and The Who, well, the Stones kind of started off in Richmond. They didn't, live there, but the Who were nearby. The Small Faces were nearby. The Yardbirds, and I read an article in GQ magazine that likened Richmond a bit to the Bay Area because there were all these old Victorian houses that a lot of students and young people were renting out and living there. It was quite a hub of kind of alternative things in London, in the Greater London area. One of the prettiest places due to how beautiful the Thames is there and the beautiful park, Richmond Park. And very middle class, and I'm a bit further out from Richmond on the Thames. I'm from Hampton. Richmond was one of the big places to go to, and Kingston. But we went there because we wanted to score some hash. And when we walked in there, I recognised this one guy sitting there who I'd actually seen at a strawberry fair. It was the first kind of hippies I'd seen in the local area. They were all sitting around quite exotic and playing bongos and guitars. And I really observed them. I was too shy to join them. But when I walked in, I recognised this guy whose name was Tom, same name as my granddad and my nephew. And we sat down and they all looked at us like, yeah, young little guys, who are you? And we sat down and we had, we were quite cool. And we just said, look, we want to score some hash. Can we get some? And then, Tom made some little kind of comment to somebody, and somebody did something, passed him something, and I handed him some money. We scored our first quid deal, and it was wrapped in some hashies, dark hashies, wrapped in silver foil. This is what we had, was a little strip about that long and that wide, and we were very excited. And we said we had a cup of coffee, and we ran out of there kind of quite fast down the steps of Richmond Bridge down to the river, and kind of found a little place set quietly down there, rolled a joint, because I had the cigarette paper tin and my brother showed me how to do it, and we smoked it, and still nothing seemed to happen. And we were like, oh, really? What's this? It's got to be more than this. And in Kew nearby, there was a church that was kind of a youth club, but it was really hip and run by this kind of really kind of progressive young Christian guy. But he was really cool. He had really long hair and glasses and a moustache. And we'd been there before, and he just let people do what they want. And he even had a couple of extra guitars you could play. So we went over there, and as we arrived, there were these couple of older people, looked a bit, maybe 2 years older than us. And we knew that there were kind of, new things. And we just said, hey guys, we've got this hash and we've just been trying to roll joints and we're not sure, we're not getting high, we're doing something wrong. And they just said, well, how much are you putting in? And we showed, they said, oh, come on, you got to do it like this. And, we'd rolled another joint before going in. And then we sat there and smoked that joint. And that was the first time I got stoned. And suddenly a whole new world opened up for me. And it's not like that for everybody, but for me, it was like everything went suddenly sparkly and really interesting and had a whole bunch of different dimensions to it. And I wasn't really an alcohol person, wasn't used to taking alcohol or getting that high. And so and we hung out and had really good time. And I just remember going on my bicycle home that day. I had a really good Claude Butler, a very good sports bike with easy rider handlebars, and I thought I looked really cool, and I was going up the A361 really fast back home, and I just thought, okay, I've discovered pot, So that was, I got immediately into it, and my friend Chris Jackson and another friend of ours called Gordon, and then a few other friends in our group, and because of my school, my house was right opposite the school. My friends used to kind of come in the morning, meet me there. They used to sometimes they'd drop off their bikes so they didn't have to leave it over there, and they maybe join. I'd be finishing off my breakfast, and sometimes when because my dad went off to work, my brother was at college, and my mum at this time had a job as a school secretary, so she would be off, and there would just be us, and we would sit there and have a joint before going to school. We were not very good pupils. In fact, none of us were really into what we were doing. In fact, I can't remember one lesson at school that was interesting at this time. It was actually a nightmare. And also when I joined in 11, I'd just been listening to kind of Jimi Hendrix and Axis Boulder's Love. And there's that famous thing where he says, and if 6 was 9, and I'm gonna wave my freak flag high. Woo! And I've been listening to that, and then suddenly I'm going into this depressing, oppressive world. Hampton Grammar School was kind of founded by Cardinal Wolsey at the time of Henry VIII. And of course, it wasn't a public school, it was a grammar school, but it had the mindset of being a rigid kind of like public school. And the headmaster, George Whitfield, at that time, he had a cape on, and he had a mortar board, and all the teachers had their capes on, and we had prefects who were just students with capes on. It was all very oppressive, and there was a girls' school next door, and you weren't Lady Eleanor Hollis, and you weren't even allowed 20 yards near the fence. It was all kind of very, very old school, and all that happened to me was through this time was I just wanted to leave school and grow up and get out of this. We were all just trapped due to the fact that we were young, and we had to go through this process. That's what I felt like at this time, and we were smoking pot, and then my brother had all these magazines, and I was reading about it, the underground scene, and getting a little bit of an idea. And it wasn't really until he got the book Play Power, which was written by Richard Neville, the Australian editor of Oz magazine. And it was one that I really wanted to, I think I probably even could have stole it from my brother and read it before he did. I couldn't put it down. It was really interesting. This is where I got a first overview of what hippies were. A thing going on in Holland, a thing going on in San Francisco, going on in New York. There was this thing going, and there was a journey overland to India that was involved in this thing. There's a strange new generation with a new explanation. Oh, people in motion. That's basically, it was all summed up with this, getting an idea of what that was. And this is what I wanted to do. I just wanted to grow up and be a hippie. I'm just trying to find out what it was. I was too young to be a complete hippie because I was living with my parents and living at school and having to do what other people wanted you to do. And it wasn't going to be too long until LSD came, and some people may gasp and go, "Oh my goodness, at such a young age!" But this is my story, a specific story, and I've had to look back at my life and go, "Oh my God, did I make the right choices?" But this is what happened to me. Now, my elder brother, he was very protective, but he'd also introduced me to pot, and my friend Chris Jackson had taken some acid, he said it was called Strawberry Fields, and he said, wow, it's just amazing, it's way different than hash, you've got to have it. And I was going, okay, let me just find, I'll wait a little bit more, I'm just not quite sure. And the next weekend we all kind of hang out, our little group, and another friend of mine, Frank Harris, decided to drop acid, and I thought I'll just watch him and see how he goes with it. And he was just having a great time, and I thought, oh well, look, if Frank can take it, it can't be that bad or that challenging. So I think I discussed this with my brother. My brother had admitted in this discussion that he'd actually had LSD a few times, kind of with his friends, and he said he was very, that it was much stronger than smoking pot. And he said you have to be quite careful and be in the right kind of like with right people and settings. And he gave some guidelines. And he most probably doesn't remember doing this, my dear brother, but actually he was the one that gave me my first acid. And he had this, and got this little pot and a bit of cotton wool, and inside it was this very thing, and it was a blue cheer microdot. Basically, that's what the name of it was. And we took a whole one and we cut it in half, so that, because I said Chris and me are going to take it, Gordon and me are going to take it this weekend. He said, okay, but be careful, and whatever you do, don't tell mum and dad. So okay, so I went off on this weekend, and it was a Sunday, and there was a group of us, but it was only Gordon and me that were going to drop the acid together this weekend. And as far as I remember, anyway, we were together, and we went to L'Auberge. We sat there, we dropped the acid, and they just said, hold the table. There's an outside area. We're going to just go in and get some coffee and stuff and drinks and bring it out. And while they were gone in there, I suddenly started to come up on the acid. And initially I just went into this kind of almost a panic. I remember just looking around to my side and looking at the cars coming that were just turning around to go over the bridge. And I just remember there was a kind of the VV, and it looked like a kind of Noddyland thing, and it started to kind of almost smile at me. And I went, oh God, I didn't expect, I was thinking I wasn't expecting it. The whole idea of thinking was different, because where was the thought coming from? And you're talking to yourself. And then there was this thing where I looked down on the floor at my foot, and my foot just seemed so far away. And then there was this thing, me, my foot, me. And as I was going through this kind of process and kind of feeling very disorientated, suddenly they came back from inside the restaurant and said, hey, how's it going? I was called Mark before I was called Maturadas. They went, how's it going, Mark? And I said, yeah, it's quite strong. Yeah, I'm just coming up. And they said, well, look, let's go from here. Let's go down to the river. And as soon as they came back and everything, I started to relax and go, okay, cool. Everything started to feel a bit more kind of, I had some reference points, and we kind of went out and we did this thing that me and Chris had done. And as we went down the steps, I suddenly found myself at the bottom, and I couldn't remember actually how I got down them. Somehow my body had just kind of not floated, but I couldn't really figure out how it done it all. It just got on automatic pilot. And I think we had some kind of drink of water, or a bottle of water or something. I remember, and we were walking, and I was just coming up, and they were goofing around, and everything was just heightened. The energy and the light and the vibes coming from everything. And it was like, I was trying to take it in. And then we got this, I remember the bottle of water, someone throwing it. And it was like it was in strobe lights. You could see all the water kind of break up into particles. And it was kind of wow. And there was quite a wow factor behind it, but it was slightly disorientating and still, especially that first wave. And then we ended up going to this youth club, and just kind of there was a slideshow there, and I started to kind of relax a little bit and chill out. And I kind of just remember it was on a cloth, and every time somebody walked in the room, the cloth would undulate and the whole image would do that, and I was just mesmerized by it all. Anyway, time went through and we were still tripping, and it was in the evening. And so me and Gordon decided to walk all the way from Richmond back to Hampton, try and kind of walk the trip out. So we walked all the way back, and there's this long road where my house was, Hamworth Road, and his house was much further past at the end. And as we walked down the road, I got nearer and nearer to my house. And when you're outside, you think that you've kind of like come down a bit. And as soon as I kind of came in and opened the door, I actually had a key. I suddenly realized, oh my God, I'm really tripping still. The whole house was pulsating. And I just wanted to avoid my parents who were watching television. So I came and go, hi, I'm back. And hi, there's something in the kitchen if you want. Yes, Mum. And I went in there and got something. I said, I'm really tired now. I think I'm going to go to bed. I think my dad came into the kitchen while I was doing this, and I really avoided eye contact, and I just kind of carried on a banter and went upstairs and had the sandwich, and I couldn't sleep for ages. I was just, my eyes, there was all these kind of far out things just dancing around. And as Paul McCartney and many people have mentioned, I mentioned that it's quite exhausting, LSD. You just want to go, okay, I've had enough now. It just kind of goes on and on and on and on. And I actually tried a bit of this technique that I'd learned from one Maharishi workshop I went to, where it was, I got this basic idea of just kind of stopping thoughts and observing them and not identifying with them and just letting them come and go. And I just did that, and the next thing I went off to sleep. Went off to school the next morning. Gordon had come that morning before school, which was unusual, Monday. Went off to school. My mum went off to work, and she came back from her work early before we came out of school. And when I came in, she had this my mum was very normally quite light, but she did have an authoritarian side to her, and she was looking very grave and concerned at me. And I was wondering, and she said, I've just talked to Mrs. Young, who was my friend Gordon's mother, and she says that you were with Gordon yesterday, weren't you? I said yes. She said that Gordon took yesterday some LSD, and immediately my mind was racing, and I went, and I was really terrible. Really, I told a blatant lie. Um, um, I kind of knew that my mum just wanted a story, not to think that I'd actually taken it. So I went. It just came out the top of my head. Oh, he was behaving a little bit unusually, wasn't he? Yeah, no, maybe. Oh, I didn't know, and my mum kind of looked at me, and well, it's a very dangerous thing, and it's something that young boys should not take. And I said, yes, Mum, yeah, definitely, yeah, cool. And and what did I do? I just went upstairs to my bedroom and had a joint and sat and smoked the joint. And I went, oh dear. And then I found out the next day what had happened, and from Gordon. And what had happened is I'd gone home, he'd carried on. His mother was a nurse, and they were quite strict Scottish Presbyterians, not like my mum and dad, quite liberal. And he came in, and as soon as he came in, she thought something was up, and she just got him in the lobby of the house where there was a light, and she kind of put him against the wall, and she looked at his eyes, and she could see that they were dilated, because that's what happens on acid. And she said, Gordon, have you taken any drugs? It's a terrible Scottish accent. And Gordon replied with the classic, just a little LSD. And thereby hangs the tale. And on that note, I am going to stop my talk and carry on tomorrow with that story of what happens in the next part of my story rapidly, next couple of years, and how I'm going to join with the Krishna story. So I'm just going to end with another song, and I'm going to sing that song that I've been repeating a few times, The Only Way to Be, because it's a nice way to bring us all back down to now, and myself as well, because it's a real trip down memory lane, and I was really reliving all of that. Sorry. This is the song "The Only Way to Be," inspired by "Be Here Now," the power of now, and the idea of how it's incredible to enter into the moment. And I wrote this song with prana. Oh, how we try to change the world around us, missing the boat while waiting for the tide, lost to ourselves in fear and desperation, dreaming of a future while trapped inside a mind. As out of a dream, my life unfolds before me, sure to reveal what's been there all the while. Struggled so long to untie these ropes that bind me. In a body of pain, I remained frozen in time. The future and the past are not within our grasp. Somewhere between the two, you'll find the real you, and what you'll find is love that frees you from all pain. And with your inner light, your sight you will regain. There's nothing to compare to the joy of being there. This moment holds the key. We are eternity. Whoa. The future and the past are not within our grasp. Somewhere between the two, you'll find the real you, and what you'll find is love that frees you from all pain. And with your inner light, your sight you will regain. There's nothing to compare to the joy of being there. This moment holds the key. We are eternity. Whoa. Na tvevaham jatu na sam na tvam nemi janatipaha. Never was there a time, this is Krishna speaking to Arjuna, never was there a time when I did not exist nor you, nor all of these kings. And never in the future will any of us cease to be. We are all eternal. We're all just passing through. And the more we realize that, the less we will suffer in this life and see life for what it is. And that we actually, over a substance called Satchitananda, where actual spirit, the soul, is composed of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. Hari Om. Anyway, thank you. It's so wonderful. It's an honor and a privilege for me to be able to share with you, especially at this very unusual time that we're all going through collectively together. And I thank God that there is some form of technology and a system where that we can communicate together and stay in touch, encourage each other, enliven us, because it's a very difficult, challenging time. Life is in general. And the more support we have from our friends and family and loved ones, the easier this journey can be. And for us to be able to send out our love and appreciation to people who are maybe not in such an advantaged situation that we are. And there's a lot of suffering and challenges out there at the moment. There is anyway in life, but certain people are going through lots of things at the moment. I'm feeling very kind of there's an empathetic thing for all the kind of a lot of people with psychological problems. This must be an extremely testing time. I've just heard quite a harrowing story today of a lovely lady and her neighbours, very old, and one of the lady being schizophrenic and actually kind of attacking an older gentleman, and it was very, very harrowing. Police having to come, and you realise, wow. It must be really excruciatingly difficult and challenging for people with extreme psychological problems. So my heart goes out to those and those people that are having to deal with them as well, and everybody. So, and lots of love to all my friends. Thank you for tuning in, and I will be carrying on tomorrow. There's a lot more stories to tell. I've still got to tell the story with me and Krishna. That's coming up next. So please stay tuned. Hari Bol, Hari Om. Lots of love. Big hugs to you all.